Hello and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. God of War is upon us. It comes out this Wednesday at the time of making this video, and so I figured I would make some form of content around it. And I think the best way to do this is to go with the ultra trendy tier system or ranking system here and talk about the mythology. I know Jackson Crawford already did this a little bit with the IGN reviews a long time ago, but I wanted to do it myself because, obviously I come at this as a gamer, but also as someone who practices Norse Paganism, the Norse religion today in the modern world and the modern interpretation. I do actually have a full review of this game I did for the Midgardian website that's actually still out right now if you would like to check it out. But this is just a review overview of how I think that God of War represents Norse mythology or has represented Norse mythology. Now with that, let us begin. And the first one here may be surprising to you, but I'm going to go with Jormungandr, and I'm going to slide this all the way up to that S ranking, the top of the tier, because I just want to get this out of the way. I don't hate this game. I actually really like this game. And there's going to be a couple things in here I think people are going to be like, whoa, that's rated really low. But Jormungandr here, I really wanted to put right at the get-go because God of War's depiction of Jormungandr is absolutely incredible. I absolutely love it. I mean, it's one of the most iconic scenes of the game. Is the first time you get to see Jormungandr, the world serpent, coming out of the ocean and looking at Atreus and Kratos. And of course, throughout the game, you get to go inside of Jormungandr and you get to actually speak to him as well. And just the whole thing is amazing. And every time you go back to the center point of the map, you get to see him wrapped around everything. It's just so cool. Now, obviously, as far as like source material here, we have a few stories of the world serpent, basically that he kills Thor and Thor kills Jormungandr as well. And then we also have the story of Thor fishing for Jormungandr and then, Jormungandr being the son of Loki or one of the children of Loki. So there's not a lot to go off of here of what it would look like, but I just love this. There could be a few nitpicks here, but I think this is the best depiction of the world serpent Jormungandr that we have ever seen in Norse media anywhere. So 100% love this S rating. Let's start really good at the top here. Now, the next one here might be one of the more minor known things, or the thing that you might not thought that I would rate here. But I want to talk about dwarves because this should show you that I am coming at this from a Norse mythology angle and really do care about this subject material, because the dwarves are in a weird space with Norse mythology and within God of War. So the two dwarves that you're really introduced to here are Brock and Sindri, which are based off of Brock and Atreus, which I don't know why they changed the name for the second one there. Maybe someone knows out there, but they did change the name of one of the dwarves. And these are the two dwarves mythologically that forged Mjolnir and several of the other sacred objects of the gods in their stories. And this comes from the story of Loki cutting Sif's hair. And so, it's cool to see these characters in here because they're kind of lesser known Nordic mythology characters. And so there's not a lot to go off of here. They're two brothers that kind of bicker with each other, and we can kind of get that a little bit, I guess, from the story of the cutting of Sif's hair here. And so their representation themselves is really good. Like, if it was just up to Brock and Atreus, I would give them a B. But really, the dwarves are going to drop down to a C here only because of the confusion with dwarves and dark elves. Because dwarves and dark elves are pretty much considered the same thing. And they don't necessarily have to be Lord of the Rings style dwarves in order to to meet any kind of satisfaction, because we're not really given any full description of what a dwarf looks like. We just know they're small. In fact, let me read this to you. This comes from the Voluspa, the very first poem in the Poetic Edda. They would make the Lord of the Dwarves out of Ymir's blood and his rotting limbs. Then they made Matsognir. He was the Lord of all dwarves. And next they made Durin. They made many man-like little creatures, dwarves of the earth, and Durin named them. And then it's a long list of the dwarves' names. So we get little creatures. So they are small. They're smaller than normal humans. They kind of look like humans. And that's basically all we get. And then the realm of the dwarves is called Svartalfheim or Nidavellir. I believe it's Nidavellir. But Svartalfheim is the most commonly known name. This is the realm of the dark elves. And so dark elves and dwarves are basically one and the same. And yet here in God of War, they decided to make them two separate beings of the dark elves and then the dwarves. So that's the only reason I'm going to drop them down to a C, is because of that confusion. And then the dark elves are going to get hit even harder when we get to them. Now, as far as the Dark Elves themselves, I'm actually going to move them down a little bit lower than the Dwarves here as far as representation. We don't know that much about Dark Elves. Again, they are dwarves for the most part. Everyone seems to agree that, you know, they are the dwarves, but they're not exactly brought up in the same context. It's weird, but they're definitely not bug-like creatures. You know, they were definitely created as a villain here. They needed another enemy type, and so the Dark Elves were the ones they went with here. You know, you're fighting the Dark Elves through a large section of the story, and they're just bugs, and it just doesn't make sense. There's no reference in mythology of them being bug-like creatures, so they're very much their own interpretation. So the only reason dwarves are above them is because Brock and Atreus are actually pretty good characters, really fun, really entertaining. You know, I would almost give them a B, but like they're kind of drugged down by the Dark Elves. But the whole Dark Elf situation just kind of brings them down for me. Now, as far as the Light Elves, this is another thing where there's never any reference, at least not that I could find, where the elves are actually called Light Elves in Norse mythology. That they're just often called Light Elves because they're the opposite of the Dark Elves. And typically, the elves in general in Norse mythology are kind of weird. I have a whole video about them, but they kind of go on this, like, Dobby the elf and Lord of the Rings elf, and they're kind of in the middle because they're not exactly these big, beautiful beings. They're more than likely smaller beings because that's what we know that has survived today in Iceland. There's a lot of different stories about the little people or the elves that live in Iceland that are kind of mischievous and mess with people and lived in the mist, and they're still respected and honored today, and they're a huge folklore thing. And so elves in Norse mythology are quite a bit different than the elves we're more than likely used to. And so even if they put like traditional fantasy elves here, they wouldn't be similar to actual Nordic mythology elves. So having said that, when you have these ethereal-like beings, they're not exactly elves from Norse mythology. So I'm going to put them at the C category because I think they're at least cool, you know, and at least their realm looks really cool. The depiction of Alfheim does look really cool. But again, they're at least a little bit better than the bug-like Dark Elves. All right, now let's move on to Valkyries. So Valkyries within the God of War game are a very hard boss, like an optional boss throughout the games. And they look really cool. Like, they're very obviously dark, twisted version of Valkyries. But they're really cool looking. And so obviously God of War is a dark twisted version of Norse mythology, and there's no getting around that. And so it's hard to dock the game at any point for that because they're honest about that. And that's why for me, Valkyries are actually going to be pretty high up here. Because if you actually look into the source material here of the Valkyries, we actually have quite a few stories about them. In fact, there's one really important one I want to read to you here, which comes from Sigdrifumal, which is a story of a hero saving a Valkyrie from imprisonment that was imprisoned by Odin. And we're given a really interesting description of what this Valkyrie looks like. Sigurd went into the fortress and saw a person sleeping there on the floor, fully armed. He took the helmet off first, and then he realized this person was a woman. Her chainmail was as tight as if it had grown to her skin. He took his sword Gram and cut the chainmail off, first cutting down the middle and then down both sleeves. He took the chainmail off of her, and she woke up and saw Sigurd. And then I do want to add here, this is from a different story, actually. This is from the poem of Voland, or the Voland's Tale. And it's describing a little bit what Valkyries look like. Egil took one of the Valkyries for his wife. He took that beauty in his embrace. Slagfin took Hlafguth, clad in swan feathers, and the third, their sister, took Voland's handsome neck in her embrace. And so I brought that there because of the mentioning of beauty and the swan feathers. Because again, when looking at the Valkyries from God of War, they're very evil looking and obviously not what I would consider beautiful, but they still have that elegance to them in the dark way. But really, let's focus on Sigurðarmal because of that chainmail, the boundness, and that's how we really come to the Valkyries in this game, is they are bound. And so for that reason, I definitely think they read Sigurðarmal and they read this bound Valkyrie, tied down by her chainmail, and that's really where I think they got their inspiration from Valkyries. So for that, they get an A. Now we're taking another really good one here. So Mimir is an interesting one. Mimir, right away, I'm going to scoot up to the S category because this is such an amazing character within the game. Our information on Mimir is so little for a being that is actually one of the most powerful and knowledgeable beings in all of Norse mythology, because he's the guardian of one of the wells. So one of the wells of wisdom that actually sits at the roots of the world tree. The other being guarded by the Norns as well. So Mimir is a very powerful being. We do know that his head gets removed and is preserved by herbs in the middle of the Aesir and Vanir War. And so Mimir definitely does have this story of his head getting cut off. And obviously we watch that play out within the game. Not exactly as it happened within mythology, but obviously they pay homage to that. But despite that, this character is amazing. Having Mimir there basically throughout the entire game on your hip, you know, antagonizing you, but giving you wisdom and being a guide and just being a really crucial part of the story. I love this depiction of Mimir, and I think a lot of people really resonated with this depiction. I think it's going to be one of the most popular depictions of Mimir in all of Norse mythology, at least in Norse mythology and in modern media. So Jormungandr and Mimir, I think, is where this game succeeded very much. I think they did a really good job representing these two figures within Norse mythology. Now, real quick, we're going to take a brief break in the middle of this video to talk about a couple things. One, I wrote a book. It's called A Yule Story. And so if you're interested in checking out a book I wrote about a Yule season, definitely not anything like God of War, because this is not dark, depressing, or anything like that. This is a happy story, a story about family, the winter season, Yule traditions, magic, talking reindeer, Odin as Yulnir. So there's just a lot of really cool stuff in here. A lot of people really seem to be enjoying it. I was really happy with the way it turned out, and of course I love the cover design here. So if you're interested in checking out this book I wrote, I'll leave a link down below. And other than that, on this channel as well, if this is your first time stopping in, there's a lot of different content here. There is Norse mythology related content, just talking about mythology if you want to learn more. I have game reviews on here as well as on the Midgardian website, as I mentioned previously. I have, you know, how-to guides getting into this religion. I have travel videos traveling around Europe and showing you sacred and old ancient pagan sites. I got so much on here. I got pagan gatherings of people honoring the old gods today. And so if you're interested in this channel, make sure you head down and like and subscribe and all that good YouTuber stuff. And if you really like what I'm doing here, I have a Patreon as well to make sure I can keep the lights on and keep doing this. So with that, let's get back to this video discussing God of War. Now let's go back to something they didn't do quite so good on. So Freya. This is a complicated one because the actual character within the game, if we remove all knowledge of Freya and Frigg for this matter, from our minds, Freya in this game is a good character. It's really, the person who acted her is really well acted. I love her character model. I love her, you know, play within the story. I love the magic. I love her home. But it's not really Freya, because they've combined Freya and Frigg. So within Norse mythology, Frigg is the mother of Balder and the wife of Odin. And there's this huge debate within the Norse mythology world of whether or not Freya and Frigg are the same goddess or separate goddesses. Now, personally, I do have a video discussing this more in detail, but I believe there is more than enough evidence to suggest that they are different deities. Really, the commonality a lot of people get into is names and etymology, which I'm not big into, but also the fact that Freya is married to Other, which is another name for Odin. And so just because they share a husband who is a shapeshifter and has a very complicated naming history, does not mean to me that they are the same deity, especially when you look into Frigg and the fact that she has multiple handmaidens, she has her own lore, she was within Grimnismal and Hiladskjalf, and so she has her own mythos away from Freya, who has this mythos of Seidr magic, of being a part of the Vanir, of the Golden Twins. So to me, they're very separate deities. And so for God of War to combine them in this way, and really just take Freya as we know her, and then adding on the fact that she has Balder as her child, you know, to me that was a mistake. Not that they could have, you know, added something else, but this was clearly a creative decision that I don't necessarily agree with, and maybe you're just like, hey, I don't care about that, she was a good character. So for that, I'm going to throw her in the middle here at the C category, because I did like the character, but ultimately they did take their own liberties with this mythology here, and obviously she is becoming a villain character moving into this new game, and so more than likely you're going to have to kill her, I would assume, or she's going to die in some way. So yeah, I'm not too keen on the depiction of Freya here, at least as it pertains to Norse mythology. Now, I do want to add in here the next game. So we have quite a bit of information, or at least we've seen quite a bit of Thor. And this has been another kind of contingency for debate of whether or not people like this depiction of Thor, because we have fat Thor now, fat redheaded Thor. I'm for anything that's away from Marvel's depiction of Thor. But really, you know, if you actually look into the description of Thor, it's basically nothing. Redhead with powerful, strong redhead that has 3 magical objects. And so there's not a lot to go off here, but I think the depiction of a burly person is better than a cut person, because this is more or less a modern phenomenon, is someone going to a gym to work out specific abs and muscles for bodybuilding and looking good. I mean, obviously the Greeks did it, blah, blah, blah. But the Norse people, the Germanic people, would have been more concerned with pure brawn, pure strength. And so a depiction of Thor being burly and being muscular in that way, I think makes more sense. So as far as the look of Thor, you know, I'm going to give him a B right here. Now, with that, this could very easily drop down depending on when the game comes out and how they do. Because Thor is one of, if not the main villain of this next game. And so you will more than likely have to kill him. And they're going to focus a lot on his brutishness, I believe, his strength, Mjolnir, and that's it. It's going to be very surface level, is my prediction. Because Thor is one of the most complex characters within Norse mythology, and this is one of the things that I believe gets overlooked quite a bit. Because Thor is a part of Alvasmal, which is a story where Thor argues with a dwarf who ends up getting turned to stone because of Thor's wisdom. You have tons of stories of Thor traveling around. You have funny stories of Thor, bashing giants' heads because he was wearing a wedding dress. And there's just so many layers to this character that, to me, it's a disservice that we continue to put him in this brutish role. So I may be proven wrong, and that's why I'm sliding him in at B. I mean, if they start pulling in some complexity here, he might move up in my mind. But I'm pretty sure God of War's depiction of Thor is going to just be this burly, brutish guy. And that's fine, but, at least he's redheaded, and at least probably a little bit more to the depiction of what Thor may have looked like in the minds of the ancient ancestors. Now, since we're already talking about Thor, let's talk about his sons within God of War. I think they did a pretty good job. We know basically nothing besides the fact that he has these Magni and Modi, and that they will take over for Thor after Ragnarok. Now, obviously, you kill one of them during the course of the game, but regardless of that, I think they did a perfectly fine job. So I think I'm going to slide Magni and Modi right next to their father Thor here, because I like the depiction. I think they did a good enough job. They did what they could. I like the interactions between the brothers, and just simply we don't have that much out there. Now, another fun one I just kind of slid in here is because I talked about this recently, is the Draugr. Now, this one is kind of weird in my mind, because now that I've just done the research on Draugr and I have a whole video on it, Draugr are more akin to probably zombies and maybe ghosts. Ghosts and zombies are probably where they're at, and so these otherworldly beings, not so much. But again, they needed an enemy. Draugr are a very common enemy within the Norse mindset. Look at Skyrim. But Skyrim is a little bit closer to that reality. I think Skyrim did a really good job because they went more with the zombie route. Whereas, I hate to put another thing in the C category here, but I think I'm going to throw the Draugr in the C. Oh, no, C category. Just because, I don't really like their interpretation of them as these more elemental, or kind of beings. I don't know. I'm just not that into it. I just made the Draugr video. I just wanted to add it in here. They're a little bit more zombie-ish than what they would be like here in God of War. All right, so now we get to another complicated one. And this is definitely the spoiler. So if you made it this far and you don't want the spoiler, that's on you. But we need to talk about Atreus and Loki. So as far as Atreus, the character, is great. I love the relationship between Kratos and Atreus. This is not that kind of tier list. If it was just about characters in the game, Atreus would be very high up on the list. But we're talking about Norse mythology and God of War's interpretation and representation of Norse mythology. And Atreus as Loki does not make sense. It's honestly stupid the way it kind of goes into this story, because the biggest component here is the fact that Atreus, Loki, is the father of Hel, Fenrir, and Jormungandr. And very clearly, they're already around. They've already done things. They're already well established. And yet you have Atreus here as a very, very young child who does not know who they are. Now, they may try to pull something, whether this, or maybe they've already said this, that, oh, it's just like another life and a rebirth of Loki because Loki was killed or something like that. But regardless, this is the story that we've been given so far. And Atreus as a little child being Loki just doesn't really make sense. They clearly did this for the sake of the game, and it doesn't really respect Norse mythology or go into Norse mythology. And so for that, I'm going to have to slide little Atreus / Loki down here in the D category. I just don't agree with it. When the reveal happened to me, and again, this could be personal for me, but when the reveal happened, I was like, what? Because I kept on hearing people talk about this reveal of, Atreus, and I'm like, okay, what's it going to be? And then I figured out he's Loki. I'm like, really? That's the big thing? I just don't agree. I'm just not for it. And now, obviously, he kills Baldur, and so it's like, oh, okay, And that's, the only thing he does in the entire game that remotely reminds me of what Loki would have been like. But at least Atreus / Loki was better than the next one on our list here, and that's Baldur. Now, this one may personally offend me, because I'm a really big Baldur guy. I really I think Balder should be a god that is represented more within modern Norse paganism. He's the son of Odin. He's a beautiful god, perfection. You know, can't be harmed by anything besides mistletoe. You know, is married to Nanna, has, you know, a golden hall, you know, full of life and love and happiness and all these good things. He is supposed to be the purest of gods that is killed by treachery. And so to depict him the way they did in this game is just so wrong. I mean, they really focused on him he can't be harmed by things. And so they took that, obviously, and ran with it and said, oh, he just can't feel anything, and that's why he's evil. Obviously, they had to have a God of War twist on there. I get it. But at the same time, it's just so drastically different than the actual Norse mythology Balder. And, you know, the way he looks just doesn't even look remotely close to what, you know, I think anyone thought Balder would look like. And so now when you search online, you just get a bunch of pictures of this guy and this nasty looking beard and his skinny tattooed self. And it's just wrong to me. And I mean, again, if this was just about the characters of the game outside of Norse mythology, he's a great character. I love his introduction. I love the fights with him. I love his struggle. I think he does a really good job. I love everything about his character as far as the game. But when it comes to Norse mythology, Balder gets a big fat F because it's just bad. It completely destroys the actual lore, you know, and the fact that you kill him. I mean, the whole point of the game, he's the big bad, and you kill him in the end. So I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, but again, like, the actual depiction of Balder, it just is not good. But anyways, but yeah, the actual depiction of Balder as a Norse mythology figure within God of War just isn't that good. But great character for a game, just not for Norse mythology. Now, these were all the main things that I could think of off the top of my head. I do have a few honorable mentions to mention here. The first one I want to bring up is Yggdrasil. I actually really like their depiction of Yggdrasil, and I'm going to slide this on the A category, because Yggdrasil is often depicted in most drawings and interpretations as just a tree that the worlds sit on. And so the fact that it's actually like this center point that holds all the realms and they all exist kind of on top of each other, I actually really like that interpretation. I love the visuals around Yggdrasil in the game. I love the realm travel. I love the Bifrost. I love everything about, for the most part, the way Yggdrasil looks. It obviously has its own liberties, and that's why I kind of slid it in the A category, but I think it was really good. You know, I wanted to mention in here because I thought a few people might say something, but there's Fafnir. I think Fafnir is perfectly fine. You know, it's a dragon. You fight him. Cool. You know, I know there's some lore in the game about it. You know, Fafnir is just a cool character, and I'm glad they included him, so we'll slide him in here at B. The last two things I wanted to add is I really, really liked the depiction of giants within the game, as far as the multiple varieties, because obviously as Atreus is, you know, I think actually within the lore, maybe I can't remember now, but he's supposed to be part giant, and so obviously there's giants that are smaller than the huge ones. But I love, like, the giant with the you know, the spike in his head. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the whetstone on his head. Absolutely love that. I think it just looked really cool. I love that you got to fight inside of him. I love that entire section. So I really love the depiction of giants within, or Jotun, within the game. The last thing I'll put on here is Jotunheim. I think I'm going to slide that right there, about the same place. I love their depiction of Jotunheim. It's kind of how I picture it. I've always pictured Jotunheim as like kind of this Mars-ish kind of place. So getting to Jotunheim at the very end of the game after everything was a really big payoff, because I think it was really well done. So yeah, that's actually all I had here. Let me know what you think. Let me know how your ranking is. Let me know down below of the characters and things I put on here. And obviously, as the new game comes out, come in here again and tell me how you think the new game is, and tell me how Thor is, because sadly I don't actually have a PlayStation anymore. I'm really downsizing a lot of things in my life here. And so yeah, please let me know what you think of the new game, and yeah, let me know what you think of my rankings here, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me, what your top ones, what your lowest ones are. And yeah, thank you. Hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. And until the hall, Skull.